Hello and a good morning to you, Miss Aisha Josephine. Today we're gonna do two parts of a session episode. First is world history. So
Oh, wow.
1950, Diners Club, the first modern credit
Wait
card was
lang.
introduced.
I-record ko pa.
Ah, I see. All right.
Do the intro again.
Recording in
So,
progress.
1950 Diners Club, the first modern credit card was introduced. Then, in 1950 as well, a first organ transplant was made, done on an Illinois woman with polycystic kidney disease. And the Korean War began. Charles Schulz's Peanuts comic strip first appeared in newspapers. Then in 1951, the first color TV program was introduced by CBS, The World is Yours. And the Truman signed the Treaty of San Francisco, a peace treaty with Japan ending World War II. And Winston Churchill became the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. 1952, Princess Elizabeth became ruler of England at age 25 after her father died. There was a great smog in London that killed thousands. Ford first mass produced the tinted windows in their automobiles. The polio vaccine was proven to be effective for children with polio.
Malamang.
1953, in April, Cambridge University scientists James Watson and Francis Crick announced in Nature the discovery of DNA. On May 29, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first people to climb to the summit of Mount Everest, the ninth British expedition attempt. June 19, Americans Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed in the electric chair for conspiracy to commit espionage. In December, Hugh Hefner published the first Playboy magazine featuring Marilyn Monroe on the cover and centerfold in nude. 1954, in January, the first atomic submarine was launched in the Thames River, Connecticut. In May, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled segregation was illegal, Brown versus Board. In August, the first evidence of men who smoke 35 or more cigarettes per day increased likelihood of them dying from lung cancer. 1955, in July, Disneyland Park, California opened. In September, James Dean died in a car accident. In December, Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white man, leading to the Montgomery bus boycott. Then we move on to 1956. In September, Elvis Presley exploded after appearing in the Ed Sullivan Show. In April 18, Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier III of Monaco. In April, the remote was invented. In May, Velcro was invented. In October, the Suez Crisis started when the Israeli army invaded Egypt over the Suez Canal nationalization. Then we move on to 1957. In March, Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, published The Cat in the Hat, selling 1 million in 3 years. In March, the European Economic Community Treaty was signed with France, West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. In October, Sputnik was launched, starting the space wars. In 1957, Sputnik was launched, not 1958. 1957, it's Sputnik's time in 1957. 1958, in October, Boris Pasternak received a Nobel Prize for Literature. but the Soviet government, which had attempted to ban his novel Dr. Zhivago, forced him to reject it. Then the hula hoop was invented this year, as well as Lego. Chinese leader Mao Zedong launched the Great Leap Forward, a failed 5 year economic and social effort that led to millions of deaths and was abandoned in 1961. And we move on to 1959. Fidel Castro became dictator of Cuba after his revolution. He championed communism. The Great Fixed Quiz Show scandals, in which contestants were secretly given assistance by the show producers, were first revealed in 1959. In November, The Sound of Music premiered on Broadway and closed after 1,443 performances 3 years later. And we arrive on 1960s. The first that happens in my list is US enters the Vietnam War. The IRA starts its fight against the British. John F. Kennedy wins presidential election. Chubby Checker and the Twist start a new dance craze, and aluminum cans were used for the first time. Now it's 1961. UN General Assembly condemns apartheid in South Africa. Berlin Wall is built, dividing East and West Germany. American-backed Cuban exiles fail in an attempt to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo is assassinated. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin completes the first orbit of Earth by a human. 1962, Telstar first live transatlantic television signal. First Beatles single Love Me Do released. Oral polio vaccine used to combat polio was invented. Marilyn Monroe is found dead. Cuban Missile Crisis takes world to the brink of war. And now it's 1963. It is the Kennedy assassination. Hurricane Flora was very strong enough that it became a really lasting lesson for everyone who is privy about weather and climate in the Caribbean. It had such a huge damage that many flowers became popular. That's why Hurricane Flora is very noteworthy. Then the Alcatraz Penitentiary closes. The first woman was launched in space, and the United States zip codes were introduced. Now it is 1964, the birth year of our mother. Martin Luther King Jr. receives the Nobel Peace Prize. Elizabeth Taylor marries Richard Burton for the first time. President Lyndon Johnson declares a war on poverty campaign. And now it's 1965. Our mom is 1 year old. The United States occupied the Dominican Republic. Malcolm X was assassinated. Race riots erupted in Watts, California. And Muhammad Ali defeats Sonny Liston. Now it's 1966. Our mom is 2 years old. Bobby Gibb becomes the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. An artificial heart is installed in the chest of Marcel DeRudder in a Houston, Texas hospital. U.S. troops in Vietnam. Death toll rises to 250,000. 1967, our mom is 3 years old. Handheld calculator was invented. Doritos first sold nationally as a basic corn tortilla chip. South African Dr. Christian Barnard performed the first heart transplant. United States Marine Corps and Army of the Republic of Vietnam troops launch Operation Deckhouse 5 in the Mekong Delta. 1968, our mom is 4 years old. Martin Luther King Jr. is shot dead at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Riots erupt in major American cities. The birth of Intel, the company patent for the jacuzzi whirlpool hot tub, was granted. 1969, our mom is 5 years old. The Beatles' last public performance on the roof of Apple Records. Apollo 11 moon landings were in 1969. Woodstock Music Festival was in 1969. In the summer of 69, the newly elected president was Richard Nixon, and he announced the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam as anti-war demonstrations on the home front peaked. And in 1969 as well, the gay community rioted after police raided New York City's Stonewall Inn. Now it's 1970. Our mom is 6 years old. U.S. President Richard Nixon orders an invasion of Cambodia, widening the war in Vietnam. The floppy disk was invented at IBM by Alan Shugart. The first Boeing 747 commercial flight to London was launched, and now 1971. Our mom is 7 years old. The sentencing of Charles Manson and his followers for the Tate LaBianca murders. Charles Manson is not Marilyn Manson, and Marilyn Manson is not Marilyn Monroe. Walt Disney was opened in Florida in 1971. Our mom is 7 years old, and now she's 8. In 1972, the Soviet unmanned spaceship Luna 20 lands on the moon. U.S. President Richard M. Nixon makes an unprecedented 8-day visit to the People's Republic of China and meets with Mao Zedong. 1973, President Richard Nixon announces the suspension of offensive action in North Vietnam. President Nixon and Vice President Agnew are sworn in for their second term. Roe v. Wade, the U.S. Supreme Court overturns state bans on abortion. 1974, the resignation of U.S. President Richard Nixon following the Watergate scandal. Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were became Billboard's #1 song. The Sting won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. In 1975, the Vietnam War ends as communist forces take Saigon and South Vietnam surrenders unconditionally. One of the very first blockbuster films, Jaws, is released in June of 1975. And we stop at 1976 with Jimmy Carter defeating the incumbent President Gerald Ford in the presidential election of that year. New Jersey Supreme Court ruling that Karen Ann Kinlan could be disconnected from her ventilator. The Lebanese Civil War, which erupted in April 1975, developed into an increasingly complex conflict in 1976 as the battle between Christians and Muslims something. Silly Love Songs by Wings, the group headed by former Beatle bass guitarist keyboardist Paul McCartney, was released. You think that people would have had enough of sillies? The Philippine chili, sillies. Okay, and